Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back. Sorry it's a little bit late in the week this week. Been a long week for me. I had a lot of stuff going on, so gonna try to get into this. Be pretty quick here because I got to get in and out of here and get to work here in a minute. So, UFC Fight Night Moicano versus Duncan. Last week did pretty good. If you guys followed the picks last week, smacked a big parlay with Terrence McKinney in round one. Forget the two other legs off the top of my head right now, but if you followed that parlay, it was a 15 to win 100. Don't know what your unit size is, but definitely a big winner. So we'll take that. Last week was a good week, and hopefully this week we can have another solid week. So kicking us off, we got Dakota Hope versus Kai Kamaka III. Now I'm going to be quick this week on a lot of these things. As I said, I'm kind of on a bit of a time crunch here, and you guys probably don't enjoy 45-minute long videos either, especially with the 5 views I got last week on my video. So we'll try to keep this one pretty short. Kai Kamaka was a guy who fought in the UFC for a while, a couple fights. I want to say like 4 fights. Didn't have a great record inside the UFC. Ran into some tough opponents. Got cut. Ended up going to Bellator and PFL after that. Looked all right on those scenes. Now he's coming back to the UFC. He's definitely a finisher. Still pretty young, 31 years old. Definitely not old for a fighter. A lot of guys sort of find themselves at that age. He's taking on Dakota Hope, 11-1 fighter, 29 years old, a little bit younger. Fighting out of Thailand, so probably a lot of Muay Thai experience. If you're in Thailand, you're definitely doing a lot of Muay Thai training. He's 11-1. Couple fights on Fury. Couple fights on LFA. Hope is the slight underdog here. Kamaka obviously has a bit of the finishing upside, but just 5 months ago, he fought on Tough Enough and lost a split decision to a guy who's 31-22. He's got like 50 professional fights. And that's just not a good look. He knocked out a guy 2 months ago. Guess that was impressive enough to get the call back to the UFC, but 3-2 in your last 5. Lost to Brendan Loughnane by split decision in 2024 in the PFL tournament. Then that loss to Diego Brandao. I think I'm going to have to lean with Dakota Hope here. Slightly smaller in terms of height and reach, but Thailand training, it does. We've seen what it's done for guys like Modestas Bukauskas and Khalil Roundtree, of course, is the obvious one. So I'm gonna roll with Dakota Hope here. He's on, a nice 5-fight win streak. His last loss was in 2022. I think it was by split decision. He's slightly younger, fighting out of Thailand, making his UFC debut against a guy like Kamaka who may just be swinging in town for a couple fights in the UFC and then back out to regional promotions. So I'm going to roll with Dakota Hope. Apparently he's an underdog, so you might be able to get some solid value there. Moving on up the card, we got Dione Barbosa versus Melissa Gatto. I'm going to spend a good 30 seconds breaking this one down. Both these women are 3-2 in their last 5 fights. 3 knockout wins for Melissa Gatto. Her 2 losses are by decision. 2 fighters like Tracy Cortez and Ariana Lipski da Silva. Her wins are over Victoria Leonardo, Sihara Eubanks, and Tamiris Vidal most recently. Hasn't fought in almost 2 years. She's taken on Dione Barbosa. Lost her last fight to Karine Silva, who's a solid opponent. Her last 3 wins, 2 are by submission, 1 by decision. She's 2-2 inside the UFC octagon. Has a decent win against Ernesta Karakaite, who is a decent fighter. Losses to Miranda Maverick and Karine Silva have aged pretty well because they're both pretty solid ranked fighters. Gatto's the underdog here. Barbosa's looking for a bounce back win. Gatto hasn't fought in a while, but she's quite a bit younger. She's a little bit shorter, but she does have a big reach advantage over her. And this fight is at 125 pounds. So Gatto is cutting down 10 pounds from her last fight. Which, in the past, that's definitely been something that's affected, power. And considering she's probably, a power striker with 3 knockout wins, 2 by body kick, 1 by doctor stoppage with a broken arm. This maybe a little bit of that power taken away, cutting down to 125 pounds. And Dione Barbosa is somebody who likes to grapple a lot, so I'm going to lean with Barbosa here, even though she's a little bit older. But watch out on the side of Gato because she seems to do a lot of damage and be a pretty solid striker. So moving on up the card, Azamat Bakoyev versus Trishan Gore. Trishan Gore has shown some fight in his last couple of fights, but I think he would do a lot of good if he left the UFC for a little while, fought on other promotions, worked his way up, and then made his way back into the UFC. 2-3 in his last 5. His losses are to Cody Brundage, Marco Tulio, and Rodolfo Vieira. Rodolfo and Marco Tulio, both, not, I would say, bad losses. They're both pretty solid. The Brundage loss definitely is pretty bad. His wins over Josh Fremd and Antonio Tricoli, which, Tricoli just got cut from the UFC, so that's not looking well. Josh Fremd, not sure what he's up to now, and that was almost 4 years ago. He's taking on Bakoyev, who was on a ridiculous run before losing his last fight out to Yusri Belgarwi, who I think is going to be a title challenger here in the next couple fights. We saw what he did last week with that dominant performance over Mansour Abdul Malik. And I think this is just, a perfect example of a bounce back here for Bakoyev. He's got strong wrestling. He should be able to get that going against Trishan Gore, and I think he'll be able to find a finish. Bakoyev is slightly younger. They're the same height. He does have a bit of a reach disadvantage. But coming off that loss, before that had a couple of nice wins inside the octagon against Zach Reese and Ryan Loder. I think he bounces back with a nice win here. Most likely a ground and pound TKO finish. So I'm going to take Bakoyev by TKO. Move on up the card. We got Haley Cohen versus Alice Pereira. Alice is only 20 years old. She did lose her UFC debut. If she loses this fight to Haley Cohen, she's probably out of the UFC. I would guess she's maybe on a 2-fight contract with hopes of signing a 4-fight after that. But if she starts 0-2, she's probably going to be out of the UFC. She's taking on Haley Cohen, who she's 2-3 in her last 5. The wins are on the Contender Series and outside of the UFC. Her losses in LFA 5 years ago now, so she's only fought, this will be her 6th fight in the last 5 years. And then her 2 fights inside the UFC octagon are against Jamie Lynn Horth and Nora Cornole, who are both solid fighters, don't get me wrong, but she lost both of those. Alice is going to need, a big bounce back win here to keep her UFC dreams alive, at least for the time being. And I think she gets that. 14 years younger, same height, has the reach advantage, has solid grappling. In her fights outside of the UFC, had a couple of knockout wins in a row, won a unanimous decision fight a year, 3 months ago, lost that split decision bout to Montse Rendon 6 months ago now. I know a lot of people were on her last fight. A lot of people aren't going to be on her this fight because she probably lost the money last time around, but I'm going to lean with Alice here, especially if you're going to get a coin flip odds. It's so rare for a fighter that's almost 15 years older than the other to win a fight. It's ridiculously rare. Younger fighters win those matchups at a super high clip. So I'm going to lean with Alice Pereira. Moving on up the card, we've got Lando Venata versus Darius Flowers. This is an interesting one. Lando Venata was a guy who was been in the UFC for almost a decade now. He hasn't fought in 3 years. His last 2 wins are, 5 years ago against Mike Grundy, 6 years ago against Yancy Medeiros. His losses are to Bobby Green, Charles Jourdain, and Daniel Zellhuber. So 3 decently solid losses. He's taking on Darius Flowers, who he also hasn't fought in nearly 2 years. He is on a 3-fight losing streak against Evan Elder, Michael Johnson, and Jake Matthews. Before that, had a Contender Series win against Madirian Gulagadze and a LFA win against Tim Hilly. Venata is a bit older. They're the same height, same reach. I think this is probably a decent bounce back piece for Lando Venata. Not fighting in 3 years, likely was dealing with some sort of injuries, gave himself time to come back, recover, and hopefully improve the areas of his game that were weak. He may see a little bit of ring rust here, but this dude has put on some sick performances in the past. I had the chance to watch his fight against Tony Ferguson, which is basically all the tape that I've seen on Venata. And it's sick. He drops Ferguson like 5 times, and this is back in 2016. So this is like right when Tony Ferguson really went on his run. Darius Flowers, 0-3 inside the UFC octagon. His only win is on the Contender Series within the UFC promotion. This fight is at 155 pounds. Darius Flowers last fought at 170, so he's cutting down. Venata's a true lightweight. Same height, same reach. Like I said, I'm gonna have to lean with Venata here. He's the favorite for a reason, I think, and I think he's gonna bounce back with a pretty exciting finish. So I'm gonna take Lando Venata by finish. Moving on up the card, we got Alessandro Costa versus Stuart Nickel. I think that Alessandro Costa's, a little bit better than what the record stands to show, and I think that's the opposite case for Stuart Nickel. I think, he was 8-0 outside of the UFC octagon when he came over to the promotion, lost his UFC debut to Jesus Aguilar by submission, and then his last fight 5 months ago to Lucas Racha by unanimous decision, where he looked pretty bad in that fight. He's taken on Alessandro Costa, who is 2-3 in his last 5 fights, but they're all inside the UFC. His losses are to Amir Albatsi, Steve Erceg, and Alden Correa. So this is like, these are quality losses. Like, Albatsi's a guy who's fighting Moreno. Erceg is a dude who's taking on, Pantoja for the belt. Has had a tough run inside the UFC, but, these last couple fights, I should say, but did enough quickly, impressed enough, fast enough to earn himself a title shot against Alessandro Pantoja. And then now, most recently, he lost his last fight to Alden Correa by uppercut, KO, which, that's a tough knockout loss, but this is a kid who's up and coming, training with the current champ, Joshua Vaughn, and is an absolute dog and young. And, he's got wins over Kevin Borjas, which is a good knockout win. Borjas almost upset Emanuel Rodriguez a couple weeks back, and Jimmy Flick. So these are 2 solid wins. The level of opponent he's losing to is so much higher than Stuart Nickel and Rocha and Jesus Aguilar. He was 8-0 outside the UFC, fighting in an Australian promotion. But I don't think that this is a fight that fares well for Stuart Nickel. Alessandro Costa has all of the takedown defense and grappling pedigrees to, be able to stuff any sort of offensive grappling approach from Stuart Nickel. And I think the striking is clearly on the side of Costa. So I'm going to take Costa, but I would be a little weary as that is a minus 415 favorite. So pretty heavy odds there. Moving on up the card, we got Thomas Peterson versus Guilherme Pat. This is definitely an interesting one. Pat making his UFC debut, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, no, my bad. This is his second fight in the UFC. He won his last bout a few months back. Before that was fighting on LFA. He's taken on Thomas Peterson, who he's had a bit of a tough run recently. His last fight out was against Vitor Petrino, where he looked decent at times, but, still ended up getting knocked out in that 3rd round. His last 2 wins are against Dontel Mays and Muhammad Usman, who I believe are both out of the UFC now. I think Mays is outside of the UFC. I think he got cut. But, taking on guys like Petrino, Shamil Gaziev, Jamal Pogue's definitely not a good loss in retrospect, but the Gaziev lost and the Petrino loss, these are, decent guys at heavyweight. Guilherme Pat, coming off that win against Alan Fry Jr. Less than 4 months ago. Quick turnaround for him. These guys are basically the same age. Pat's a little bit older, almost a year older. He's 4 inches taller and is going to have a 7-inch reach on Peterson here. I think this is going to be a tough bounce back fight for Peterson against a guy who's just, physically big, a much taller opponent, much longer opponent. But I do think that he showed signs of success against a huge opponent in Vitor Petrino. And I think he could find some success here. I do think he's got a lot of one-punch power. And I think if Pat, gets tagged by Peterson, he could really struggle and get finished early. But I think the odds make sense here. I think Yakhyaev Pat being the favorite definitely makes sense. I'm going to lean on the side of Pat, but I think this is like one of my more cautious picks on the entire card. And I think that this is one that could, like, honestly go either way. So, going to be interesting. Pat's an undefeated guy, so I'm going to have to lean with him, considering he's so much bigger. But Peterson is a dog. Live odds there. I wouldn't be surprised if he can pull out the upset win. So, moving on up the card, Robert Ruchala versus Jose Delano. Ruchala is a guy who fought, I want to say KSW. Yeah, he fought KSW outside of the UFC. So, solid fighting promotion to come over to the UFC from. 3-1 in his last 4 fights at KSW. Lost his UFC debut to William Gomes 6 months ago by unanimous decision. He's taken on Jose Delano, who's on a nice 4-fight win streak, 3 of those inside the LFA, and then most recently, 7 months ago, won his Contender Series bout by unanimous decision against Manuel Exposito in what was actually a pretty awesome fight. Ruchala is actually the younger fighter, fighting out of Poland. KSW is actually a pretty respectable outside promotion. I ran KSW up there with, the Cage Warriors and Octagons of the world. Some solid UFC fighters have come over through that pathway, like the Oleksiejczuk brothers fought in KSW. I want to say Lucas Wicklax fought in KSW. So, Ruchala, pretty big underdog here. I think there's some decent live odds, live odds there. I think he may be able to pull off something sneaky here, but Delano seems to be a super tricky opponent. He is a bit older. They are the same height, and Ruchala does have the reach advantage. But Delano, Brazilian top team guy, a lot of finishes in LFA. I'm going to have to lean with the side of Delano. This is another one, though, that I'm going to be pretty cautious on. Minus 415 is a pretty heavy favorite. And I think there is a decent chance that Ruchala can shake out this performance. So I'm going to lean with Delano. But aside from that, we're going to move on up the card to Tommy Gunn McMillan taking on Manolo Zucchini. So I think this is just an absolute, throwing a bone at Tommy McMillan. I think that, this, obviously minus 1,000 favorite. It's kind of crazy considering he did get 10-8'd in one of the rounds on his Contender Series fight. But he ended up still winning the fight, which shows, how much of a dog this dude is. And the guy who he took on, David McGoyan, I want to say was his name. Yeah, David McGoyan. He was a beast. He's actually fighting on the upcoming MVP promotion, Ronda Rousey, Francis Ngannou card here in May. He's one of the, I want to say, main card openers on that card. So that's interesting. He's taking on Manolo Zucchini, who, lost his UFC debut to Morgan Charrier 2 years ago, 6 months now. Hasn't fought since then. I think they're basically throwing him a bone here. McMillan is 4 inches taller, has a 5-inch reach, is a natural striker. He's pretty nasty on the feet. The takedown defense is definitely where he struggles. I don't think that Manolo Zucchini is going to be able to put together some crazy game plan to get McMillan down on the ground for, 10, 11 minutes of this fight, which is what he would need to do to win it. So I'm going to take Tommy McMillan by finish. I think he's probably in for a performance to the night level finish. I think he's going to put something on Manolo pretty quick, likely in the first round. So that's where I'm standing on that fight. Moving on up the card to probably my favorite fight on the whole card, Rafael Estevam versus Ethan Ewing. This is a tough one that I took a lot of time, trying to break down, trying to think about. I'm going to lean with Rafael Estevam here. Now, don't get me wrong, Ethan Ewing on a nice win streak, coming off of an insane UFC debut win against Malcolm Wellmaker, a guy who I was super high on. Thought could potentially fight for the belt someday. I still do believe that. But Ewing brought it to him on 5 days' notice after winning a fight the week before. And he got a lot of hype. And that makes sense. it does make sense, but at the end of the day, Rafael Estevam is a guy who's 14-0. He has got insane grappling, like I'm telling you, top level grappling. Insane submission game. And I think that, you even go back and watch the Ewing-Wellmaker fight. Wellmaker is not a grappler at all. And Ewing looked uncomfortable in some of those grappling exchanges, and I think it's something that he seriously struggles with. And a reason that he has 2 losses on his record is because of his holes in the grappling and jiu-jitsu department. I mean, you look at Estevam, he's got jiu-jitsu tatted across his chest right there in the picture. You can look at it right there. I personally got Estevam at plus 120 odds earlier in the week when I placed my bets. I'm feeling good about that. I think the odds are going to swing a little bit. I think a lot of money is going to come in on Estevam. I think there's a lot of money lifting up the side of Ethan Ewing coming off of a big win against Malcolm Wellmaker, but I do think this is a nightmare matchup for him. Estevam is moving up from 135 pounds to 145 pounds, so Ewing is going to have a bit of the natural size advantage, but Estevam is taller. They do have the same reach. And I think that, this is going to be a nice win for Rafael Estevam on his already solid UFC run, 3-0 inside the octagon with wins over Charles Johnson, who has a knockout win over our current champion Joshua Vaughn, Jesus Aguilar, and Felipe Bunez. So he actually Estevam has fought at 125, 135 maybe? Maybe I'm tripping, and maybe he only fought at 125 and is jumping all the way to 145 for this fight, which is kind of crazy if that's the case, because I think, all 3 of these guys who he's fought are flyweights. He missed weight last time out, and he is not even thinking about the bantamweight run. He's just going straight to featherweight. I respect it. I didn't realize. I thought he maybe had one fight at 135 pounds. I guess not. He's jumping a 20-pound jump from flyweight to featherweight. So that would be interesting. Definitely makes me overthink some things a little bit, especially live here. But I'm still going to lean with Estevam. The grappling is insane. He's naturally strong. He's obviously had a whole camp at this weight. And he's taller, and they have the same reach. So I think it's a good matchup for him at 145, and I'm going to take Rafael Estevam. Moving on up the card, a quick one. Abdulrahman Yakhyaev versus Brinson Ribeiro. Yakhyaev is going to win this fight in the first round by whatever way he really pleases. Ribeiro has been knocked out, in his last 2 fights against Azamat Mirzakhanov and Umar Sy. Umar Sy is really bad. He's not a good fighter at all. Yakhyaev, I think, is a good fighter, and he's going to be a guy who has a nice run at 205. Already won his UFC debut against Cerqueira by submission in the first round. Obviously, a nasty knockout win on the Contender Series a couple months ago. This is an easy 2-0 finish for Yakhyaev. Not even going to think about it. Brinson Ribeiro, not good. Yakhyaev, younger, slightly shorter, slightly, a bit of a reach disadvantage, but he's just so much stronger and has such better finishing potential in this fight. So I'm going Yakhyaev all day. I don't think Brinson Ribeiro even stands a chance. That takes us to the co-main event. Berna Jandiroba versus Tabitha Ricci. This is an interesting fight. Jandiroba is currently floating at a minus 130 favorite. As you can see on Tapology, it actually has her listed as the underdog. That's probably because she opened as an underdog and a lot of money is coming in on Jandiroba, and I think that is for good reason. Tabitha Ricci, while she may be pretty nice to look at, she's not the greatest fighter. She is 5 foot. I know this fight is at 115 pound strawweight, but she's 5'1", 61-inch reach, so Jandiroba is going to be taller. She's going to have the reach advantage, and she just has the grappling advantage over Ricci. Ricci definitely has a bit of, a power advantage, I would say, with a knockout win in her last fight, but her last 2 losses are to Yan Jianan and Lupita Godinez. Her wins against Tisha Pennington and Angela Hill are decent, but the Ribas, obviously, her best win, and I still don't think it's that great of a win. Whereas Jandiroba, on the other hand, was taking down Marina Rodriguez, Godinez, who already beat Tabitha Ricci. Amanda Lemos 1 year, 8 months ago. Yan Jianan, which another loss on Ricci's record, and then fought for the interim belt against Mackenzie Dern a couple months back. She did lose the belt, but I do think it's going to be a bounce-back piece for her. I'm not going to overthink this one too much. I think Jandiroba gets the grappling going, and I think she wins this one by decision. Maybe finds a way to get a submission. She just needs to stay away from, potential damaging strikes from Tabitha Ricci, and I think she'll be fine. So I'm going to go with Jandiroba, and that takes us to the main event. Renato Moicano versus Chris Duncan. Had time to think about this one. Moicano was one of my first favorite fighters in the UFC octagon, but he's just not the same. Duncan is younger. He's on a better run. And I'm going to have to go with Chris Duncan here. 4-fight win streak against Balaji Oki, Jordan Vucinic, Mateusz Rebecki. Insane win against a dog in Rebecki. And then most recently, a submission win over Terrence McKinney where he weathered the storm. Got the finish win. He is going to be slightly shorter, half-inch reach disadvantage in this fight. Moicano definitely has the pedigree edge, has the, a former opponent edge, considering 2 fights ago he fought for the belt against Islam Makhachev on crazy short notice due to a same-night injury from Arman Tsarukyan. But then, 9 months ago, a loss to Beneil Dariush. Does not look good on the record. Before that, had a good win against BSD, who I still don't rank super highly. Decent win over Jalen Turner and a win over Drew Dober. So he's still 3-2 in his last 5 fights, but 2-fight losing streak. And I think that's going to be the problem here. I think Chris Duncan's going to be able to get this one done. I really like Duncan's game. He's got crazy submissions in the bag. Really good Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So I think, if Moicano's going to win this fight, he's going to have to be able to catch him into some form of submission. And I just don't see that happening. I think the striking is a very even level between these two. I think it leans the side of Duncan. I think that Duncan honestly has even better that Brazilian jiu-jitsu than the Brazilian Moicano. So I'm going to lean with Duncan here. And that takes us to our bets of the week. So for me, bets of the week, I'm going Chris Duncan, Virna Jandiroba, and Rafael Estevam. That is a 3-leg parlay. I'll float that up on the screen. I got it at about plus 500 earlier this week. Aside from that, we're going to we'll go with a parlay of Dakota Hope, Lando Venata, Alessandro Costa 3-leg. And I think that it may be worth a bit of a sprinkle on Alice Pereira and Guilherme Pat, a little Brazilian 2-leg parlay. So I'll flash those up on the screen. I'm going to say right now, definitely one of my more low confidence cards. A lot of these fights I feel like could go either way. I don't feel very good on any of my picks except for the 3 that I highlighted in the Chris Duncan, Jandiroba, and Estevam picks. Aside from that, definitely pretty up in the air on a lot of the other fights. So, gonna lean with that. Hopefully another solid week after a nice week last week. And then next week we got UFC 328. So, definitely gonna be an awesome video next week. I'll make sure to get that one out earlier, probably on Tuesday night, probably to expect that UFC 328 video. Tons of crazy fights to break down next week. Super excited for Ulberg and Yuri Prohaska. Aside from that, make sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe if you liked this video. I really appreciate all the subscriptions, all the likes, all the comments. It means a lot. Definitely keeps me wanting to do this every week. So appreciate you guys. I'll be back next week for UFC 328. Super pumped about that. As always, thank you for watching. I'll see you next week. Peace.